Here we are on another Friday. We're ready to go again, Tim. And I was just thinking, last week we talked about stakeholders, and you had mentioned something about value and how stakeholders and value and all that kind of comes together. Why don't we take the fourth principle today and just talk about value itself?
That would be good. That would be good. And to start off, I have the most unique story in the world. I was working on strategic planning for data centers, and I did that for about 3.5 years. This wasn't really project management, but it was working on a proposal with a client. And I was working with the CIO, and he said, that's a bang up job you did with that spreadsheet, Tim. I really like the numbers. Now, how are you going to measure that value? How are you going to plan and develop that value? And how are you going to hand it over to me? What does it look like at the end of the project? He was asking me to actually scope the value, not just use it as something to justify the price of a project, but actually develop it and hand over stakeholders. That was a turning point when I actually said this value stuff is real, and this is why the clients are attracted to us.
What he was doing is, Tim, prove your worth. That's what he was telling you.
Exactly. Yeah, you're really good at spreadsheets, Tim, but I'm not buying a spreadsheet here.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's a lot of our clients do that. And might I say that even the organizations for which I have worked have expected that as well. I mean, no value, no position, no job, right? So it all comes down to what can we do for you yesterday?
Exactly. And it's not just handing over functionality. It's handing over something that actually solves a problem, fixes an issue, or creates an opportunity.
That sounds like a good definition. Is that how you would define it?
Well, let's start with that. Something that it's something measurable that solves a problem, fixes an issue, or creates an opportunity. What would you call value?
Well, I think even if I take it out of the realm of IT project management, I might talk about it in terms of its worth, in terms of its importance, in terms of its usefulness. So it's something that we put value on. How's that for defining a term by itself?
Yes, and if you actually go down to the very, very core of the meaning, it's something we hold in high regard, something we desire. Okay. And in the realm of projects and project management, it's the part of the project that we desire. It's the thing that tells us we need this, we want this, and we're even willing to sacrifice for it.
So if someone is telling me they need something, they're already perceiving the value that's going to be there from the end result.
Yes.
And therefore, I, as their supplier of the project, need to be aware of that and need to present a result that meets that person's expectations.
Yeah, and actually the other side of the coin fits too. If they're saying, I have a problem and I need that problem solved, the problem isn't the value, the solution is what the value is. So even when they're providing you a problem, that problem is something measurable and quantifiable. And I reach one of the most novel ways I've reached these discussions with stakeholders is talking about what does success look like at the end of the project. Because success is when you kick your feet up and the problem solved, or the benefit is realized, or you have something to prove that you don't just have a workable product, you have a thing that generates value.
Well, exactly. We've just gone through a period where our home values, I'm going to use something outside of the IT realm, where our home values have increased. And a lot of people think of that just in terms of of money, of worth, of what am I going to pay on a mortgage basis every month, that sort of thing. But I remember when my wife and I, well, we've bought several homes, we've built a couple of homes, but our value, the value that we placed on something was more than just the dollar amount. There was also a subjective value. Would you agree with that? That even in IT projects, there's the subjective aspect of placing value on something?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. The value is sitting back and saying, I have everything I need. I can relax. The house and the neighborhood and the property have my back. I feel safe. Safety is a value when you buy a house. Now, these are the conversations you need to have when you have a complex project. Because if you are going to be using terms like objective and benefit and stuff like that, you're going to be running head on to this something called value, and it's better if it's quantified than not.
It is better if it's quantified, but I tell you what, sometimes you got to sell that sizzle with that steak in order to truly sell that project.
Yeah, yeah. And people passing you by the hall will sometimes say, don't talk to Tim. He's going to mention value, value, value again. And when I hear that, I say, good, my message is getting across.
Well, and I think the reason I said that too is that, I've been involved in a lot of government projects, a lot of long-term government projects.
Mm-hmm.
And although the government places a value on that project, meaning they have to budget for it, they have to have tax base for it, they have to put all of that into it. So from a pure governmental approach, they need a return on the investment of taxpayer funds. But the people that I work with on the project, 2-year, 3-year, 4-year duration, those people don't necessarily deal with the monetary aspect of what this project is costing the taxpayers. What they're dealing with is, how is this going to help me in my job? How is this going to help the people that I serve in my job? And so they place a value on it that is much different than the people with the green eye shades.
Exactly. When we talk about benefits and costs, we're talking about, finance and financial tools. And a benefit is a type of value, and it's a measurable value, but it's only one of many. And sometimes it's not the most influential one. Because let's take one of your projects, for example. You work in the realm of the public sector where the government is trying to get information from all of its constituents, right?
Correct.
For them to be able to capture the information of 20% more people than they did last year, that could be a benefit, but it's more likely something that they value. It's something that drives and motivates them, and that's the key. A benefit is just something you get in return for investing, but a value is something that actually is what you desire.
Well, and they place a high value on it because in the end, they spend extra millions of dollars protecting that information that they've collected, so that the left hand does not know what the right hand has in it. I mean, it has, so that all of the value of that information is collected is also protected highly.
Yep. That leads us to another thing. So we have objectives, we have benefits, we have needs, and now we have values. Why would the PMBOK actually talk about value instead of benefits? Why doesn't it talk about objective? Why value? What's the big deal about it, do you think?
Well, to me, I wish I understood why they would do that, but from a value proposition perspective, if you're looking at, okay, let me put it this way. If I am managing a project, if my sole job, if my sole intent is to make sure that the schedule is met, the budget is met, and that I deliver quality to my constituents, then I have only met part of what it is that I've been hired to do. But if while I'm doing all of that, basic project management delivery, I'm also looking at the intrinsic benefit or value, or what it is that my end user, my client will end up receiving when the thing is delivered. To me, that is a much higher perspective if I can keep that objective in mind. And so I think in many ways, the terms that you threw out are almost synonymous, because I can say objective, I can say benefit, I can say value. But if I keep that end result in mind the whole time I'm doing basic project management, my entire team is motivated differently than just ticking boxes on a schedule.
Yeah. There's something much more visceral, much more prescient. There's something more personal when I say value. It's I think, I want, I need, I desire. And a benefit is, even though it may be quantifiable and very specific, it may be ambivalent to actually, touching people. This is what I found. Another example, I was working with a healthcare company out in California in 2006. And we were talking about the problem they had with data. It was spread across the corporation. And they thought they were going to be able to mend it by spending $10 million. And we were trying to actually be very gentle in giving them the bad news. And the problem is, number one, we just laid out the fines that would happen if they couldn't collect, organize, and protect their personal information. Number two, it was going to steadily grow year over year. And number three, the way the data was distributed across the corporation, it was only a certain amount of time where the corporation was going to have a major data breach or a major data failure, and it would take the corporation years to recover. And it was funny because there was one director I'd been talking to for a while, and he got very animated. He got very anxious. He all but jumped up on the table and he pointed to 5 or 6 people and said, "See, that's what I was telling you all these last 2 years. You won't listen to me. You had to pay these people to come in and tell you this. Now do you believe me?" And I knew there was a value statement in that.
Yeah, that's when you give them the age-old adage that a prophet in his own country is not listened to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we struck a chord, and there was a value that we could quantify, but at the same time, it went beyond language. It went into pure emotion.
Mhm.
And values, I believe, reside in the world of emotion, not just in the world of logic and ethics.
Well, I think that's definitely true. I mean, even with my clients who are not worried about the ROI as much as they were worried about what their job would look like when the project was delivered, that was a gut feel when they could see that they did not have to hand crank calculations, that this thing would deliver almost an artificially intelligent result to them. And by the way, the result that they got was the same as their neighbor had they done the same calculations. Just those kinds of intrinsic benefits to them. In their gut feel, they go, "I'm going to be a better employee." That had nothing to do with salary. It had nothing to do with the return on the company's or the corporation's investment in terms of delivering the project. It had to do with how they were going to work when this thing was delivered. So it was totally emotional.
Yes.
The value in that case drove, I believe, their behavior on the project.
Yes. And this is why I think the PMBOK says that value is the ultimate indicator or the ultimate success. It's a simplistic statement, but once you start exploring these terms and why these terms and no others were chosen, it makes common sense. It's a humanistic response, not just a logical equation.
Well, and the other thing that I noticed from my own team in situations like what I just described is that suddenly they put less focus on deliverables. They never took their eye off the deliverable, but they place less focus on that and more focus on the intended outcome. And as long as we could keep, even if it was 2 years away, if we could keep that in the forefront, they delivered better product.
You know, and what that means, what you've just described, is being able to structure the project such that you're not stuck to a function. You're actually allowing the function a little bit of flexibility. You're tailoring the project and the work such that you can maybe deliver the same deliverable, but deliver more value.
Yeah. And more customized for this particular organization.
Isn't that nice?
And you had to use the word tailoring. Now that means we have to do another podcast later on tailoring. Isn't that one of the principles? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, we will. We have that on our list, and I'm really excited to talk about that one. But at the same time, you know, you brought up a major fact here. If you use value as your, you know, as your navigational tool, you're not so tied to the deliverable, and you can sometimes exceed what people consider to be the solution.
Oh, it's so much more. And, you know, you're no longer looking at just the quantitative benefits, but you're bringing into the equation the qualitative benefits. So that's, to me, that's huge. To me, that gets the project team out of being, we've talked about this before, out of being just order takers to one who are truly coming alongside their client and really together in a collaborative fashion, designing and coming up with a much better solution.
Isn't that wonderful? That's when the magic happens.
That's when the magic happens. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. So I have another question.
You always have another question.
I have tons of questions because I listen to my students. And I think, you know, I thought when I became a teacher and trainer, I thought I knew everything until my students started asking me questions. And here I am 20 years later with maybe 4 books full of questions. And I know it's a never-ending river, but here's the one I'd like to bring to you. What are the problems, or what are the misconceptions that you've hit about value when you've been on a project? Where do you think people went wrong with relating projects to their value?
So I'm going to talk about the olden days because, you know, I'm of that age. When we were basically tied to the science or the technology of delivering projects, that's what we focused on: schedule, technology, good code, good testing. So again, our focus, I think, was too much on the technology and the technical or the process aspects, and we didn't necessarily think about value as much. And to us, the value ended up being if we delivered the project on time, within budget, and got some sort of nod from the client that they were satisfied, then we felt successful. We never, ever, ever went back and thought, could we have done this differently? And could we have delivered a better product now that we see it in motion? So I think it's one of those things where now, in today's age, we spend more time looking at value and therefore deliver better product.
You know, and this is the key. It's decoupling the word value from the concept of functionality. Functionality is the component of the deliverable that actually, quote unquote, delivers the value.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, if you can get the value, you can be more flexible with the functionality. Go ahead.
I was going to say the focus on schedule and budget is not wrong. We should be focused there, but not at the expense of the value.
Yes, because the value is the ultimate result that people are looking for. That's what gets people excited about projects, and that's what gets people to lay down the millions of dollars to see what you're talking about. So that's part of it. One of the other things that I've observed with this whole value discussion is that people get very optimistic when they talk
Yeah,
about
I was
value.
just going to say
And
that. Yep,
yeah,
you got it. Yeah, yeah,
and all of a sudden risk goes out the door.
yeah. This is
Yeah,
going to be their nirvana, right?
exactly. It's don't worry about that. This is going to solve all our problems. Well, yeah. But on the other hand, if we don't do it right, it's going to create others and possibly even worse problems.
You said optimism. How about altruism? I mean, that can be just as, I'm going to use a negative word. I'm going to use the word detrimental, because
Yeah.
I don't think being altruistic is negative. I don't think so. But putting too much altruism on the backs of the project team, hoping that they deliver this incredible value, can be detrimental.
So optimism is hoping for a positive outcome, where altruism is being very forthright in what you're doing without expectation. And being forthright with what you're doing doesn't always mean you're going to get what you aim for.
Right. Yeah.
And being hopeful is just that. So this is one of the reasons why we stress risk and risk management as a constant conversation as we talk about this. And again, a lot of times project managers are considered naysayers, or you're a fuss budget. Why can't you allow us to just dream our dreams and shoot for the skies? Well, you can shoot for the skies, but if you do that without a parachute, you get what you deserve,
You fly too close to the sun.
That's right. That's right. There's other issues too. There are other considerations we have to have. There's all sorts of directions we can come at with these errors and these models. And we've been talking about these for centuries. Sometimes there are errors in logic. Sometimes there are errors in human behavior, but there are always potential for errors. Philip Kirby, the man behind the 4 absolutes that went into developing total quality management, was often heard saying that people are always going to make mistakes. He said that defects and the analysis of defects is not quality, but because people are human beings, we have to have defect analysis, and we have to look for defects. It's just the fact of life. Like you were talking about data and data protection. We can say we're going to do that, but unless we understand the actual true impact to a corporation for a data breach, the hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines, the years of remuneration for the people that you hurt their data, unless we really understand that, not just as project managers, but as a collective of stakeholders, experts, and decision makers, we're not going to give risk the attention it deserves.
Exactly. And you lose that sense of trust. Then how do you rebuild it?
Oh, you don't. That's the legacy of lost business. You're not going to recover that trust.
I have a colleague who writes a kind of a fun little technology newsletter every week in terms of new products she's found, new apps, that sort of thing. And there was a breach a little while ago with one of the password applications. There's several out there that will create passwords for you and maintain passwords for you, and by the time she finished, including talking to the company itself in terms of what they were doing, she had lost so much trust. She felt she needed to put it into her newsletter for her readers. And so it's not like the value of that particular organization began to go down, because if one person is dissatisfied, loses trust, and then starts passing that on to their hundreds of readers, it starts to snowball. And that's, we have to be very careful that we not only seek to give value, but that we seek to keep value.
This is something like I said, it's something worthy of sacrifice, and therefore it's worthy of putting good money up and time to protect it as well.
Well, you and I had a conversation one time, and you said something about a analogy that you called Chesterton's fence or something. How would that apply here?
So, okay. So when we talk about value, we say we're going to do something and it's going to be new and it's going to change the way we do business. And Chesterton's fence is an old philosophical model that says, here you are walking along a hillside and you hit a fence. And you say, I need to take that fence down because it's blocking my way. And Chesterton's fence reminds us that if you find something artificial, like a fence or a cultural artifact, don't just remove it, because if it is something artificial like that, it's been placed there for a reason. It did have value in the past. And until you understand that past value, you can't really assess whether or not what you have is better.
I bet a lot of our listeners could relate to that from everything from no, that because that's true, because and I've come across that several times in projects where you want to say, oh, we'll get rid of that entire program, or we'll get rid of that entire batch job, not knowing that it was put there for a very specific reason. And
Yes.
then you end up, if you do get rid of it, you end up creating havoc.
And the last thing that programmers do is write a comment.
Yeah, exactly.
This is important because, and that's the problem. It's not just a programmer error. And the thing is, there are so many things that are supported by culture, all these habits that these organizations and groups have created over the years that may not even be artifacts. They just maybe be things the way it's always been done. And for us to go in and to manipulate those, this is some of the hardest work that I've had, is actually untwining, the cultural details in order to either replace or change a habit inside of a group.
Well, and kind of to sum up this entire discussion, you asked me the question, what's sort of a major error, a major mistake that you've seen in projects that sort of get in the way of value? I think all of these things that we've just talked about, to also talk about the fact that whether it's optimism or altruism or too much focus on the technology and the process rather than the ultimate value, I think a lot of these things end up getting in the way of our systems thinking, of our critical thinking. And if we don't have that critical thinking, we can't possibly deliver all of the value that we otherwise could.
Yeah, I'm of a mind these days to think about critical thinking going hand in hand with an understanding of human behavior. A combination of those two is the best approach to, to understanding value, as well as understanding the risks that you face as you actually create value inside of an organization.
And that's another area that I've seen a major error in this whole discussion around value, and that is that the project manager looks at the sponsor, the main stakeholder, and looks at the value that they have placed on the project and put all of their efforts in satisfying that, and not paying attention to the 40 other stakeholders that also have a different perception or a different need, and not combining those into the overall value statement.
Yes. And this is another issue that we have. It's called tragedy of the commons. Okay, this is
tragedy. Okay, so I got to hear this.
Right into this.
Yeah, I got to hear this.
So another philosophical model is called a tragedy of the commons. This talks about communities and groups and culture. Okay. In the old days, I'm talking about 400 to 600 years ago and previous, when you built a village, you usually have a square in the middle. It's what's called a common area or a commons, and it's kept open, not just for celebrations, but other things, right? And if it is not well controlled, people will say, if I just let my sheep nibble grass here, it'll be good. Nobody else will mind. They won't notice. It's just a little bit of grass. But the problem is, these changes actually impact each other, because it's not just one person saying, this is a common area. There's no rules that say I can't do this, and I'm going to go ahead and do it. And it fulfills a personal need. It fulfills a personal value, but it fulfills it at the sacrifice of the group. And this is another problem we have when we go to actually make a major change inside of an organization.
Yeah.
The value we have may be stepping on the toes of other values. And, the whole concept of, act in urgency slowly is the best advice you can. And again, once again, a good project manager is often accused of going too slow, but it's this very reason alone. We have these artificial things like a fence and these shared areas, these commons, and we have to be very careful in understanding how we're upsetting things and how we're manipulating the big picture against just what these needs are speaking to.
Yeah, and that's not to say that the major shareholders or major stakeholders' needs aren't sort of superlative, right? I mean, that they're not more important than the others. So there are times that person's needs, objectives, and sense of value will take over and become the dominant ones. But that doesn't mean that as project managers, we don't have the right or the obligation to look at those other ones and see how we can blend them and satisfy many of them. Because quite frankly, if the major stakeholder in my project, all they're looking for is a return on investment to beat their major competitor, but the head of human resources is looking for a project that deals with the comfort of their staff as they work at their desks, why can't I meet both of those at the same time? And I think as a project manager, we have that obligation to look at everyone's requirements to see how much of the value we can satisfy.
Yeah. And frankly, early in our career, we are very laser focused inside of the project and its environment and the value that this project has. And so the best that we can do is use our relationships with our sponsor and senior stakeholders and product owners and others who are more connected with business to understand how our value interacts with the rest of the organization. But as we grow in our influence and power, and as we grow in our ability to reach out to business to understand it as well, this gives us an opportunity to actually have these frank conversations and hopefully shape these projects, not just for the success of the project, but the success of the greater organization as well.
Man, that's wisdom right there.
Yeah, hard earned.
Exactly. Yeah.
So here's another question for you. Suppose I'm a project manager and I've been asked by a director to help them with a proposal. And I have a value that I think is unquantifiable. How do I go about quantifying it? Let me give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
A community wants to develop a public park. And one of those value criteria is the growth of community goodwill. How am I going to actually quantify it so at the end of the project, I can demonstrate that we have been or we will create that goodwill?
So if I'm listening to your example, And I kind of bring it back into the realm of the IT. There are some equivalencies there. So using the idea of community goodwill, I mean, you look at everything from the way that you got me. You've got me
This is hard.
here.
This is
This
hard.
is, yeah.
Let's do that exercise here, because I think there's a roadmap.
So repeat the question again.
So how do I take an unquantifiable or a unsmart value like goodwill and attempt to quantify it? Let's talk about that, and let's talk about an application or an integration activity that consolidates the work of 3 organizations. And let's say that that's going to generate goodwill. How do I quantify that goodwill so at the end of the project I can demonstrate here are the examples of goodwill that we've created?
So the best way I'm going to take this out of the IT realm, because you just reminded me of something. I have rental property. It's the product of my many years of 80-hour work weeks. But here's what happened in the property that I bought. The developer got together with the city, the people who were dealing with the tax base and that sort of thing, who got together also with the school districts and put an entire plan together such that the community was built around dog parks, excellent schools, beautiful development areas, so that all 3 of them became an attractive, safe place for people to be able to come in. Now, in terms of that was the community goodwill, people felt good about living there, buying those homes, renting in those places. But at the same time, there was benefit to everyone. The constituents felt safer. The schools attracted good teachers and therefore were able to deliver better education experiences for their students. And the municipality and the city ended up with a higher tax base.
Yeah, and on top of that, you could actually go into another entire level where you can say the decision makers all up and down had a sense of pride in what they had developed, and there was a potential for them to retain their positions as city and community leaders, which is cool too, and that's no small value.
No.
So what you've just done was actually created the connection between the function and the value, which is critical. We have to look at them, we have to decouple them, but we have to remember that it's the function that delivered the value, and it's the value that people desire and why people invest in these projects.
So in that case, so the example, and I took it out of the IT realm because it hit me as you were talking that this has been my personal experience. So taking it out of the IT realm, hopefully I was able to show that you could quantify it. Now, I'm not sure that they quantified it ahead of time. I think they knew that there would be some elevation of safety and education and tax base, but I don't know that they could quantify how much.
Right.
At the inception.
Right, and they could have had multiple projects where the neighborhood just developed the neighborhood without considering education,
right,
or developed the neighborhood without considering the growth of business that the neighborhood might need, but actually doing a project that actually integrated all of those perspectives. You created a shared value which was more influential and in the end actually a better result for everyone. So
now that we've talked that through, because you did stump me, Tim.
Good.
Now that we've talked that through, I can give an example from my personal experience, and that is we were dealing with a state organization putting in a new system to benefit that particular department's end user clients. It just so happened that another department had a crossover of the same client base. Not all, but some were a crossover. By going to the other organization and saying, if we can share data, you to us and us to you, we were able to benefit both organizations. One was a revenue collection, one was an entitlement project, but between the two of them, by sharing data, we were able to enhance both.
That is the key. And sometimes you have to do that extra scope work outside of the organization. But by doing that, number one, it improves the value of your project, but it also influences other organizations in a similar manner. This is when you know you're working at a higher level of project management, when you're not just fulfilling, project needs and values, you're actually solving real, true business problems.
Well, and in that example, obviously there were some value statements from the two organizations that were competing. But we focused on bringing them together by the ones that would help both organizations. And that's what made the project a success.
Yes, indeed. I have one last question for you, and then we'll call it a day. And this is a tricky one. This one has to do with human behavior. So let's say I have a project and my stakeholders say, just get the work out the door. We just need this now. Don't talk to me about value. Don't talk to me about selling the project. Just keep your heads down and do the work and get back to me when you're done and give it to me. What can you actually do in that situation to help them understand value and the reason why you're talking about value?
So I can answer that in a couple of ways. Number one, my major stakeholders in every project I've ever worked on would never have asked me that because they already knew their value, they required value, and therefore they didn't push necessarily the work, getting the work done. They pushed the results. But the second part of that was the people I dealt with on a day-to-day basis. It seemed like they felt that their next promotion, their next pay raise was based on getting it out the door. And so those were the people that I had to satisfy in a way that says, we'll work together and get it out the door according to what you need, but we'll also bring the value. And then I was able to share with them what the end result would look like.
Yeah.
And by bringing them along and having that same sense of mission, we were able to kind of wed them to the value as well as to their own, promotion, their own promoting themselves and get that done. So I think that's what it comes down to, is just making them see it or helping them see it.
Yeah. And also in a gentle way over the course of many conversations, demonstrating to them that the proper functions, when done well, don't just deliver value, but deliver greater value than they could have perceived.
Yeah.
This is where we're getting into the conversation that we had in the 90s and the early 2000s about customer delight.
Well, and I think, Tim, that we can also, the whole conversation we've had today is about delivering the value at the very end. I think we can deliver value all along the way. And I think we can show that value all along the way. And that's how we keep people interested and actually motivated to stay with that project and to really make it work.
I am an avid supporter of this, not just doing it through creating requirements and building value into the scope so that your traceability and your acceptance testing demonstrate the value, but having it integrated into your slides, having it integrated into your dashboard. Here's not just value as a bunch of words, but having it as an indicator and a measure of progress.
Well, and having it little mini victories all along the way.
Yes.
Nothing motivates more than having some early victories. What do they call that? The low-hanging fruit? Pick it.
Yeah, exactly. The early wins.
Yeah.
I surprised myself often when I was working on this, and a lot of times in the early 2000s, the corporations were very conscious about the power requirements of the growth of technology were causing their heads to swim. And by demonstrating, proper decision making in technology, you can actually not just control the functionality, but you can control these things like, ongoing product life cycle cost, not just project life cycle cost. And this was the fun conversations that I like to have, not just the are we going to make it on time, but
Yeah.
look at the thing. We don't have a 35% return on investment target now. We have a 75% return on investment because of what you and the team learned in the labs. And
Well,
that's what really gets people excited.
yeah, and I've had a couple of client organizations for which we developed systems that held on to those systems. Now they had to enhance them, but for 25 years. What's the life of a system? It's never that long, and yet we were able to deliver value in such a way that it was not only productive immediately, but it was ultimately maintainable such that they ended up with more long life out of it than ever expected.
This is the beautiful thing. And again, value is not something that we can actually walk into a project and say, here's your value. It's something that we have to understand through ongoing activity. Just like all of the other things, the value you put in the project charter is high level and it's visionary. But as you go into the planning, that's when you learn to articulate it and quantify it.
Well, and I wonder sometimes if that's where the whole agile methodology came from, is to be able to deliver those quick wins early and often so that people maintain their excitement about the final delivery.
Yes, yes, indeed. It was done through need. It wasn't done through desire. Maybe we can have a history of Agile someday and do that. That's another.
You mean there weren't 10 guys sitting around desks somewhere and saying, why don't we do this thing? We'll call it agile.
There were about 35 groups of 10 to 100 people who were doing the same thing, and they were coming to the solution. But because they were talking more about an attitude and mindset, they all were aimed at the same thing. The tools were different, but
Yeah.
they all came with that attitude and mindset, and it all had to do with value.
Yeah. Well, in my mind, because I've been on so many 2 and 3 and 4 year projects, in the predictive methodology, sometimes the requirements changed midway through. And so even before you delivered your first product, you're already making changes. So yeah, I'm off topic now, but yeah, I can see exactly where these things came from. So
Yeah, for a future conversation, I'd like to capture this so we can have that conversation that both you and I want.
Well, this has been a very, shall I say, valuable discussion.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And again, we'd like to provide even more tools to you. If you have questions on how to, or you have questions on, I have this issue, how do I solve this? Please leave them in the comments and we're happy to discuss.
And if you have value to add to our discussion, that would be also useful. Put it in the comments, find us on LinkedIn, but just present us with your wisdom as well.
Yes, this is not something that we own. Truth is a shared content, and we can all learn by collaborating.
So I'm going to go back over the transcript of this and count the number of times we use the word value.
That'll be interesting. So thanks again. I really appreciate these conversations, Merv. The next show that we have is just going to be as exciting.
No, these are good.
Yeah, these are good, and thank you for collaborating in these areas. And again, everyone, we're doing this not just for us to have fun, but to actually help you. And if you need further clarification, reach out. And who knows, we could be talking about your question or your issue on a future show.
So just before we hang up, I have gone back over a couple of several of our podcasts, and it was remarkable how often that I was searching for words. And it's because everything we talk about comes from experience. And a lot of times I'm having to think, how have I come across this in my own experience? And so the two of us keep each other on our toes the entire hour. I think that's a good thing.
It is. It is. Thanks again, everyone,
Right.
and look forward to talking to you again next week.